So, as we discussed last week, if we don't do any chazara or chazara uh, in the kind of classical Ashkenazi way to say it, chazara, we will not be able to keep any of this stuff in our minds. So last time we met, we learned about same-day burial. We learned that the Chizkuni, a mid-13th century French philosopher and commentator, he said we need to do the same-day burial, even for criminals, because it's too much publicity for a person who committed a crime against God. It's already enough punishment to be killed, and it's a reminder of the judges who convicted him. Perhaps someone will go after them. Rashi comes in, he's a couple centuries earlier, also from France. He says, no, it's actually about being made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. Then we talked about Tuma and Tahara, ritual purity and ritual impurity, right? This has an elemental connotation when we talk about Tuma or Tahara in the Tanakh. We actually are hearing it mostly talking about gold or oil. This is an elementally whole thing, right? This is a material thing. Then when we hear when it's talked about when it's describing a human being, you can contract tuma today or ritual impurity through leprosy, birth, menstruation, semen, or being close to someone who has died. And all of these things, as we spoke about last time, are really about vulnerability. When we come in contact with something that makes us vulnerable, it makes us less ritually pure, or another way to think about it, less boundaried, less whole. Then, when the rabbis are trying to actually put these things into boxes, right? They're trying to codify this and make it law. We learned about tent ritual impurity. When there's a tent, everything in the tent, if there's something ritually impure, let's say that there's a deceased person in the tent, when there's something ritually impure in the tent, everything in the tent is ritually impure, right? So we begin to see how when these things in theory play out in practice, there's actually a little bit more tension. There's a little bit more discomfort trying to figure out where the boundaries actually lie. We learned that Tuma and Tahara, ritual impurity, ritual purity, are really much more of a continuum of being vulnerable and being boundaried, or being slightly vulnerable versus completely whole. We also, just like when we come into this world, we are whole. Our sages post-temple destruction begin to talk about the mikvah, which we'll see in a little while is a way to spiritually cleanse a living person, and also it's developed later on a person who has died. And today we'll begin to look at that. Then we went to, let's go to our rabbinic sources, number one. Then we learned about vidui, right? Confessional. And this is a way for a person who is still living to become ritually pure in some kind of way, not fully ritually pure, but to allow them to get all of the regrets off of their chest, right? The confessional is, we talked about this, repent one day before your death, which you can see on the screen. This is from Pirkei Avot. And this is the idea that you should be kind of repenting all the time. We talked about this parable about the king, and he invites you to a feast, but he doesn't tell you the timing of the feast, and the people who are ready to go into the feast and are waiting outside, even though they might be waiting for a couple days, they're the people who are let in, and they are really welcomed by the king, and the king is excited to see them, as opposed to those who have not been preparing for the feast for a long time and come in the clothes that they came in off the street. They're not wearing something special for the king. They're not really ready to be in the king's presence. And of course, in this parable, as in all parables in which there is a king, the king is God. So it really raises this question that the entire time, this meta conversation, the entire time that we're living, we should be thinking about how we can make sure that we are repenting. I think is a big kind of scary word, but doing tshuva. How can we think about, oh, this thing, I made a mistake, it didn't go so well, maybe I hurt someone I cared about, or maybe I hurt someone I didn't even know. When I come to that fork in the road again, how do I make sure that I take a different path, right? We're constantly trying to improve ourselves and look toward that better version of ourselves. And this also brings about a question of, even though it might not even be possible to do that, right? So how do we move through the world in a way that we're trying at least to bring in a piece of this vidui to our everyday lives, right? Even though it might not be possible to go through life completely elementally whole, we still kind of try to seek to do that. And then when we get to Tahara, hopefully a little bit later today, we'll talk about not only a seeking of ritual purity, but also hygienic cleanliness, right? So we'll have both of those. I wanted to begin our time today with this text that initially I wasn't going to include, but it is such an amazing text about what it means to allow someone to die that I thought we could read it together, and really I would be remiss teaching a class about death and dying and not include this really dramatic piece. Could we have a reader? Anybody would like to read?
All right.
Great, thank you.
Well, somebody else is doing it.
Am I reading?
Sandy, go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is from Ketubot. The maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi ascended to the roof and said, "The upper realms are requesting the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the lower realms are requesting the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. May it be the will of God that the lower worlds should impose their will upon the upper worlds."
Okay, let's stop there for now. What's happening here? First of all, who is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Does anyone know?
Isn't he one of the major sages of our tradition?
He is a major sage. I'm not sure who said that, but he is.
Audrey.
Okay. He is a major. Okay. He is a major.
He wrote the
sage.
Mishnah.
Yes, exactly. So he wrote the Mishnah. He really looms large in our canon, and he also not only wrote the Mishnah, but Hanasi was a position, right? It literally means the prince, but it's a political position. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he was a revered and brilliant scholar, and he worked to further consolidate the authority of his office, which was something that was necessary at the time for the post temple period and the government at that time. He also was among the Jews who impressed the Romans and allowed for Judaism to continue or begin to thrive a little bit more under the Romans, even though the Romans were such an authority that did not like the Jews initially. And he actually codified and is the person who, George, I think you said, wrote the Mishnah. He mostly compiled it. He made sure and edited it down. So this is a pretty revered guy in this society at the time. So what does it mean, the upper realms and the lower realms? realms? Anybody have a guess?
Heaven and hell.
Yeah, okay. So not hell, but you are right with heaven. In fact, we'll get into this in our last session, but we have in the Hebrew, the upper realms are El Yonim here, right? El Yonim are really like we know the word aliyah, it's the same root. So ascending. So this is the upper realms, meaning the area of the angels, heaven, you could say. It's not exactly heaven, but something like that. And the lower realms, right here, we have tachtonim, which are really, you might just reading it think that it's some kind of underworld, but the tachtonim here actually refer to earth. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is being requested by heaven or by Hashemayim, by the upper realms, and by us on earth, us just trying to live in this lower realm. Okay, Sandy, did you have a question?
No, I was going to say something like you explained.
Okay, beautiful. Eve, would you pick up reading? However,
May it be the will of God that the lower world should impose their will upon the upper world.
okay, hold on. So may the lower worlds impose their will upon the upper worlds. Okay, so who is saying that?
The maid.
The maid is saying that.
No.
No, who's saying that? Any guesses? Okay, so it is unclear here, but really the sages are saying that. The Gemara makes it a little ambiguous so that we're not really sure who's saying it. But if you read the commentary, you'll see that the sages are saying it. Okay, let's keep reading. Go ahead, Eve.
However, when she saw how many times he would enter the bathroom and remove his phylacteries
Phylacteries are tefillin.
And then exit and put them back on, and how he was suffering with his intestinal disease, she said, may it be the will of God that the upper world should impose their will upon the lower worlds.
Okay, so what occurs? What does she see?
She sees that he's suffering with a serious illness.
He's suffering. There's so much suffering that she says instead, may it be the will of God that the upper worlds win out. Okay.
And the sages, meanwhile, would not be silent. For example, they would not refrain from begging for mercy so that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi would not die. So she took a jug and threw it from the roof to the ground. Due to the sudden noise, the sages were momentarily silent and refrained from begging for mercy, and Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi died. Ooh.
Okay. What comes up? What comes up for you when you read this text?
Well, if you're suffering terribly, death is agreeable.
Okay. If you're suffering terribly, death is agreeable. All right. Aaron?
I mean, I see this from my office in the ICU, that I struggle today with rabbis not seeing that death can be a mercy, like it's pictured here, that the rabbis are the is that death rabbis do not, and would keep him alive for as long as possible despite his suffering.
Okay. Yeah, so the sages, right? They're begging for mercy this entire time. They're saying the Misha Beirach over and over again, probably not the words of our Misha Beirach, but the words of the traditional Misha Beirach. They're saying psalms, they're begging God to keep him alive. Michelle.
Only to add to that, that although this woman one-ups the quote-unquote sages, she remains unnamed.
Hmm. Yes, yes. There is this moment in which this woman allows for mercy for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and also the text is in her favor here, right? After this text, there's no refuting of what she does, and yet she goes unnamed. Beautifully said. Audrey, you had your hand raised. You're muted, Audrey.
I was just going to say it was the notion of mercy and that's paramount. And that maybe, as we pray so often, that God is a God of mercy.
Beautiful. And I also, we have the translation of mercy here. The Hebrew is rachamim, which our traditional translation is actually based on a Christian understanding of rachamim, which is based on the Septuagint, the original Greek translation of this word rachamim. A closer translation is actually compassion. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because this is a compassionate God, right? We pray to a compassionate God so often. Of course, sometimes we see that God is not so compassionate, but that's for another day. Aaron, go ahead.
I'm just a little bit confused because the way the rabbis are praying for mercy is not the same as the way we are using the word mercy. They're praying for him not to die, which is not, I think, what the maidservant or the rest of us are using as the term mercy.
Beautiful, beautiful. Right. So we are thinking that she is being compassionate to him in letting him die, or she's being merciful to him in letting him die. And the sages have a completely different idea. They want him to get better and continue to live on. Karen. Oh, sorry, Audrey.
I was wondering if maybe there was a degree of selfishness among the sages, that his handmaid, the rabbi's handmaid, was really concerned about him and his welfare, watching him suffer, whereas the others, it was probably that they wanted him to live for their own personal intellectual benefit, that it might be that she, unnamed as she is, as Michelle said, was maybe the holy aspect to this situation.
Yeah, perhaps. That's definitely a possibility. Russell, go ahead.
There is a very beautiful sort of poetic imagery going on here. I love the parallelism. We're speaking of the upper world and the lower world, and she's physically on the roof. So it's as if the physical world is reflecting or paralleling the divine world, if you will. And I'm also very moved by the suggestion that the thing that is keeping Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi from joining that upper world are the demands of this physical world. The people in the physical world are demanding his attention, distracting him from this, but ultimately there is an elevation going on. Now, I have to say, I don't really particularly think of deathbed repentance, upper world, heaven, upper world after death as being a particularly Jewish set of images. I think of that as a more Christian imagery, but nevertheless, I sort of love the poetry of this.
Yeah.
Yes, beautiful. So when we talk about the upper world here, we're talking about like the land of the
Bring something
angels,
back to the kitchen for me, please.
where the angels live, where they're fluttering around, right? So it's not exactly a heaven as we would think about it in our Jewish culture today. But I love what you're saying about the imagery here, right? It is as if by this maidservant going onto the roof, she is reflecting the will of heaven and acting upon this will of the angels, or we could even say perhaps the will of God, and allowing him to end his suffering. Meanwhile, it is amazing here that it's prayer that is keeping this person alive. This person is being sustained, even in poor health, by the words of prayer of his students around him. So that's very interesting too. Beautifully said, Russell. Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful that there is this ongoing struggle between the earth and the more lowly realms, keeping the rabbi alive and on earth, and the struggle with God, who feels that it's perhaps his time to die. And I think I'd like to say that maybe this is not just between the sages and God, but for every human being, there's this ongoing struggle for, is it time? Are they ready? And that kind of thing. And that, to me, is beautiful, actually.
Beautiful. So I'm really glad that you raised that, especially because this text that we see in our Talmud, right? So it's not a Torah text, but it's still pretty old. It's one of the foundational pieces of our tradition. This text is what Death with Dignity responsum are based off of. Whenever you see a discussion of death with dignity in a rabbinic sphere or in a halachic sphere, a sphere of Jewish law, you are always seeing this text. And it also perhaps leads us maybe to have a much fuller discussion of halachic death with dignity on another day. So when a person dies, we'll get back
Please,
to...
if we could do that too one day.
I would love that. So when a person dies, this person, the people that are close to this person, and you'll see that we have one who's deceased relative, right? So a person, when it says a relative, we're not talking about like your second cousin. We're talking about a person in your immediate family. Mi shemeto mutal lefanav. So mutal is a more harsh word for like laid down. It's really more like hurled down. And then lefanav, before him. And now we're going to talk about the different ways that people are perceived. When a person dies initially, we've heard this word avelut, probably. This is a word that means mourning, an avel is a person whose immediate family has died, and that person is buried now. Before the person is buried, there's a liminal space here. There's a space where we're not totally sure if this is a person who is fully in mourning yet. Maybe they're in shock, right? I'm sure anyone who has experienced a death of a loved one knows how that can be. Sometimes it's been expected for a long time, and maybe this person has been already mourning. The immediate family member has been already mourning. Maybe it came as a complete surprise, and it takes a long time to actually realize that this person is gone. Maybe even when it's expected, it takes a long time to realize a person is gone. That moment of burial, at least in the rabbinic perspective, the rabbinic understanding and landscape of mourning, that's the time, as soon as the earth is put on the shovel and then hits the coffin, right? Hits the aron in Hebrew, or the casket. That's the moment where an onain, someone who's in this liminal space, onain for a man, and onena for a woman, onene for someone whose gender is unclear, moves from this liminal space into being an avel or avela. Okay. So we're going to talk about what this liminal space is all about. And we're looking at the Mishnah, which was codified once again by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi around 200 CE. And so this is really the beginning of the codification of what it actually looks like. So a person who just lost someone, patur mi kriyat shema, they're exempt from kriyat shema, from reciting the Shema. Min hatfila, from reciting the prayer, which at this point was the Amidah, not the rest of the prayer that we have around the Amidah, just that standing piece. Min hatfilin, and they were exempt from putting on tefillin every day. So that's the onain. That's the immediate family member. Now we're going to expand it. Nosei hamita, the person who lifts up the casket, the pallbearers, excuse me, the chilufehen, and the person who, and the people who are going to be the replacements in case the original pallbearers aren't able to do it on that day, or are too close to the the deceased to actually be able to emotionally do it, right? Perhaps they're so encased by the emotional situation at the moment that they're not able to stand up and hold up this casket. So they need someone to replace them. So the replacements and the replacements of the replacements, et she lifnei hamita ve'et she'lachar hamita, and the people who come before and carry the bear and come after the bear, all of those people are also et shelamita tzorech bahen pturim. They're all also exempt from doing all of those things, right? So what were those things again? They're kriyat shema, saying the Shema. They're doing the Amidah and praying, and they are exempt from putting on tefillin. Okay, so that's what the Mishnah says. Then, however, everybody else, ve'et she'ein lamita tzorech bahen chayavin. Everybody else is chayav. Everybody else is not exempt. They're obligated. Okay, then we see the Talmud comes along. The Talmud was codified between 300 and 500 CE. And we see that the onain now is actually exempt from a lot more. Katani mihat patur mikriyat shema, right? We heard that already. Patur, by the way, is the word for exempt. You probably already picked that up, though. Patur, they're exempt from kriyat shema. Umin hatfila, they're also exempt from tefillah or the Amidah. Umin hatfilin, they're also exempt from tefillin. And umikol mitzvot. Okay, ha'amurot batorah. Okay, so, and they're also exempt from all of the mitzvot that are specifically mentioned in the Torah. Why do you think that this is the law, that this law was expanded? Any guesses? So yeah, Audrey, go ahead. You're muted, Audrey.
Would this imply all 613 mitzvot, or just specific mitzvot?
There's a question about that. Some rabbis would say that they are They are not, they don't have to do their patur, they're exempt from doing all 613. Most rabbis come out and say that they're exempt of all of the mitzvot that are specifically mentioned in the Torah, right? So, and this is all of the positive mitzvot. We're not talking about negative mitzvot like don't kill someone, or don't steal, right? We're talking about the positive mitzvot. Yes.
This is opposed to interpreted mitzvot.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So we have this question, you see in the notes, right? The bolded here, that's the exact translation of the text. And then the unbolded, when Safaria translates the Talmud, is kind of an editor's note. So you'll see that the editor picks up on the contradiction, right? This extra piece about all of the mitzvot, this is a contradiction from before. Why would this person not be allowed to do that? And Rav Papa comes in and he explains. The Breita refers to a text written around the Mishnaic period, so between the destruction of the Second Temple and 200 CE. That's a Breita, but it wasn't included in the Mishnah. Okay. The Breita as applicable only to the particular case when one turns his face away and eats with the deceased laid out before him. Okay, so in the other cases, when he is in a different room, he is obligated to all mitzvot. So Rav Papa says, well, it's really only when the person is in the room with the person who has died. Rav Ashi comes in and he saves the day. The phrase "the deceased is laid out before him" is not taken literally, but rather, since it is incumbent upon him to bury the deceased, and he is not yet buried, so he's still in the land of Onain or Onena, it is as if he is laid out before him, as it is stated, and Abraham rose up from before his dead, right? So we heard this already. We understood the conversation around Abraham. And this is the text in which the rabbis couch that this person, the Onain, is not obligated by any mitzvot, or any positive commandments, at least, when they're in this moment of liminality. Okay, so it turns out that Brachot, this piece of Talmud, continues and talks about not only the Onain, not only the pallbearers, not only the people before or after the bear, but now we're going to talk about the people who are sitting shmirah. So has anybody heard what this word shmirah? Has anybody heard this word shmirah before?
No. Isn't it the observation of not leaving the deceased alone?
Okay, yeah, not leaving the deceased alone. Michelle, did you want to add a little bit to that?
Only that it means to watch or to guard. And so when you're, camping out at night and one person stays up, that's also shmirah.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. And also we hear, right, that someone is shomer Shabbat or shomeret Shabbat. That's a person who in our colloquial terms we would say keeps Shabbat or is doing Shabbat, is Shabbat observant. But in the actual Hebrew, it literally means someone who is watching over or protecting or guarding Shabbat. Yeah, Judy.
It seems that what they are doing is so holy, and they should be so intent on what they're doing that they don't even have to think, wait, which mitzvot should I be doing? What should I not be doing? They're just focused on their holy job of watching, guarding the deceased.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we'll see that in just a moment. And And it comes back to this idea of kavod hamet, right? This idea of giving reverence to and respect and honor to the deceased. So let's read the Gemara. Judy, would you read the Gemara for us?
Okay. The Gemara challenges, wasn't it taught in a Baraita? One who watches over the deceased, even if it is not his deceased relative, is exempt from the recitation of Shema, from prayer and from phylacteries and from all mitzvot mentioned in the Torah. The Gemara responds that these two sources should not be understood as contradictory, but as complementary. In both the cases, he is exempt, where one watches over the deceased, but it is not his deceased relative, as well as the case where it is his deceased relative, but he is not watching over the deceased.
Okay, so why do we think that we are exempt from all of these mitzvot? First of all, as an onain, right? Why are we exempt from all of these mitzvot? Also, as a pallbearer or someone who is walking before or after the bear. Why are we exempt from this mitzvot when we are watching the body? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, Sandy.
It's a recognition of and allowing the person who is feeling all these emotions at the loss of a loved one to experience that without worrying about, oh, I have to go to put my phylacteries on or do some obligation.
Yeah. So when a person is not obligated by all of these positive mitzvot, that actually frees them up in a spiritual, in a mental way to put all of their mental energy toward doing these things. On the other hand, if we're talking about someone who is an onain, it's not just about doing these things, it's about mourning. This person perhaps isn't able to have you, we say that you're supposed to have Covid Rosh, you're supposed to have a particular honor or mental headspace to pray, right? To do tefillah. This person can't do that. Perhaps the death, perhaps the mourning is too great, or maybe even the shock is too great, that the person who is an onain or a pallbearer or someone who is walking behind or in front of the bearer is not able to actually have that Covid Rosh in the moment. Their entire mental awareness is taken up by mourning. So now we have, in this passage that we just read, the person who's sitting shmira. Of course, they shouldn't be distracted, but at the same time, a person who's sitting shmira, we have here that it doesn't have to be a relative of the deceased, that's for sure. But it could be someone who doesn't even know the deceased or even know of the deceased. And often that's the case. Why do we think that this person does not have to be obligated? Why do we think that the text brings that? Karen and then Alan.
First of all, I agree with what Judy said in response to that, which is that they should be wholly focused, wholly, WHOLLY, if not wholly, HOLY as well, focused on the deceased and should not have to concern themselves with being observant of the laws. And that is one part of it. And if it is indeed a relative, I would think that they could be so consumed by their grief and, as you say, their mourning, that we should allow them to really be present in that moment of grief without concerning themselves about these other things.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alan, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you're supposed to be consumed with grief while you're shamim, because doesn't tradition tell us that during that period we should be reciting psalms?
Excuse me. Okay, so I'm glad you raised the question. So a shomer or a shomeret is not usually consumed with grief for this person. In fact, as I mentioned before, sometimes this person doesn't even know the deceased, right? Sometimes the shomer or the shomeret doesn't even know the deceased, hasn't even heard of them. So we're really speaking about two different categories of people. Actually, if we want to go back to the text before, we're speaking about four different categories of people. We have the onain, the person who is the direct relative, right? Immediate relative. We have the pallbearer, the person who's actually carrying the casket. That's often not a direct relative at this time period, but it's often someone who at least knew the deceased. And then you have the people walking in front of and behind the bear, right? So those are the people who knew the deceased or had some kind of relationship, or maybe, their spouse knew them and they're showing up to the funeral. How many of us have done that before? Or something like that. Or now the fourth category of person is allegedly the furthest away, or perhaps the furthest away from the deceased. This person is the shomer or the shomeret who is guarding the person at this moment. And that person, right, is saying psalms, is engrossed in some kind of Jewish text. It doesn't have to be Psalms, although Psalms is the most traditional for this position. But they're doing some kind of Jewish learning or reciting of the Tanakh texts. Yes, Russell.
Well, this is a deeply personal response, but this says something completely different to me. I am a wordsmith by nature. Someone would say I'm a word nerd. But this is reminding me that there are moments in life for which there are no words.
Mm.
Anyone who has held a sleeping infant, anyone who has smelled the earth after the rain, anyone who has seen sun rays break through a cloud, and anyone who has truly stood in the face of death is faced with a moment where life's meaning does not take the form of words. And that is by saying you are absolved even from prayer. It's saying to me, forget the things that are your daily life, and even forget the things that can be incorporated with words, and find something else.
Beautiful, beautiful. There's also something that you pointed out. There's a hierarchy here, right? The most important thing is to do this mitzvah that has to do with the person in front of you, the deceased in front of you. You are not obligated to any other mitzvot except in this moment for sitting with this person, even if you had no idea who it was. Sandy, go ahead.
I think also the larger category of people may be exempt so that the mourner, the actual mourner, doesn't worry that the other people have taken care of all the things. They can't be called away by some obligation. They could give attention to the deceased so that the nearest mourner can fully experience that period of the mourner's life and loss.
Beautiful. So this text comes to say that everything else is taken care of, and you don't need to worry that people are not going to be there to take care of you and to take care of the person who just died.
Right.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Audrey, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, I just have a question about the Shema, because I've been told that when a person passes, the immediate reaction, if there are people with that deceased, is to say the Shema.
So the Shema is a part of the vidui. It's usually, traditionally, those are the words that people want to use their last breath for. Sometimes people around them will also say the Shema, or they'll say the Shema on their behalf if a person is not able to speak at that moment. But it's not like, oh, a person dies and you're with them and your immediate reaction should be to say the Shema. That's not like a halachic. That's not like a piece of Jewish law.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about where does this shmirah thing even come from? And later on in the Talmud, kind of ironically, we hear the verse that it's predicated, that it's derived from. So our Talmud writes or reads, and it was also taught in a Braita that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, it is not necessary to protect a live day-old baby from weasel or from mice, for they run away from the baby. Okay, so we're talking about why would you do shmirah? Well, a baby doesn't need shmirah. A baby doesn't need this guarding, this protecting, or this watching. Perhaps it does, but a mouse or something is, I guess, according to the Talmud, afraid of a baby.
Huh.
But if Og, the king of Bashan, is dead, it is necessary to protect him even from a weasel or from mice, as it is stated. And here we have the verse, here we have the verse. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens. This is what God says to Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. The Gemara explains, as long as a person is alive, he is or they are feared by animals. Once they die, they are no longer feared. So this is the piece that makes us know that we need to do shmirah, that we need to do this watching of the dead, or else perhaps animals will come attack them or something like that. Then we get into this piece, Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah was written by Maimonides, one of the core Jewish scholars, and Mishnah Torah was written by Maimonides in an effort to popularize Jewish law, popularize Jewish practice, and it was written in a language that was for the everyday person. It wasn't written in a kind of heady language, in something that you needed years and years and years to understand, like Talmud. This was like a pocket edition that you could just carry around, and in every specific moment, you could scroll to the tab or turn to the tab, and there would be the law. So Maimonides writes, one who is bereaved of a relative for whom he is obligated to mourn is exempt from Kriyat Shema, from saying the Shema, until he has buried him, because his attention is distracted, just like we discussed earlier, from reciting the Shema. He's not able to have Kovid Rosh. He's not able to actually have that mental grounding and that headspace to be with God, and to really make sure that his prayer is with intention. A person who is watching a body is also exempt, even if it is not the body of a relative. When there are two watchers, one should continue watching while the other withdraws and recites the Shema. I thought this was kind of funny. When the latter returns, the other should depart and recite the Shema. A grave digger is also exempt from Kriyat Shema. So in one case, Maimonides says, well, maybe you should be guarding Meitim, Meitot, Meitimot, the cherished deceased, in pairs, so that you can split up and you can still do the mitzvah. But in the second case of the gravedigger, he continues to broaden it, right? It seems like for some reason, perhaps because this moment of being near death is so vulnerable and creates such an intense emotional expression, even if you don't know someone, even if your job is to dig graves, that you are not obligated to do this prayer in this moment. Okay, So that's the end of Rabbinic Sources 1. Now we are moving on to Tahara. I think that this is also the main event. Many of you might know that I founded and still run the Reform Community Chevra Kadisha of the City of New York. Where we do trainings twice a year. We have volunteers both do the coordination of the tahara, of the ritual cleansing, which we'll talk about in a moment a little bit more. And they lead these moments too. They're trained to lead them. We have 13 communities that are part of the broader Chevra Kadisha and do about, I don't know, probably between 3 and 15 taharot every month. So it's really a large enterprise at this point, or larger. So mikvah and tahara, just like when the rabbis were manufacturing vidui, they looked for other ways at first to say, how could we make sure that someone has gotten all of their regrets off of their chest? How can we make sure that someone, when they are breathing their last breath, they feel whole, they feel elementally whole? And, and so the rabbis say, actually, another place where we are able to create ritual purity is in mikvah. Okay, so, and in water. So there's lots of symbolism of water in the Tanakh and in our greater tradition. There's symbolism, Torah is water, there's sprinkling water before and after one eats, there's sprinkling water on people's hands after they leave a cemetery, there's ritual hand washing, there is an understanding that water is dangerous and mysterious once you get into Kabbalah and mysticism. There's an understanding that water has great powers, that God sometimes is in the water, right? We do tashlich. That's an understanding of what water can really do for us and be for us in our lives. Okay, so we have this understanding of mikvah, and that's also applied in death. So Amar Rabbi Akiva, this is from Mishnah Yoma. This is where mikvah even originates for a person who is deceased and a person who is alive. Ashrechem Yisrael lifnei mi atem mitaharin umi mitaher etchem. So we hear this word mitaharim and mitaher, and that's the same, that those words have the same root as the word tahara, right? You have the tet he resh. So Rabbi Akiva says this is a moment of extreme upset and despair for him. This is a moment in which he is about to be persecuted or experiencing persecution and looking toward the end of the temple. So he writes, "Happy are you, Israel. Who is it before whom you become pure?" Basically, how do you get purified is the question. How are you going to purify yourselves? And our text comes in and says, this is how you purify yourselves. Your Father in heaven, or Avinu Shebashamayim, right? We know that from the beginning of the prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim, Father in heaven, parent in heaven, or on high, as it is said. And then he quotes 2 verses. The first verse he quotes is about sprinkling water. Not surprising, right? We have Vizarakti aleichem. I will sprinkle water on you. Aleichem mayim. I will sprinkle water on you. Tehorim ut hartem. And you will surely become pure, or you'll surely become ritually pure. And then he quotes this very important verse that is interpreted in so many different ways, and we'll see here how it's interpreted. Okay. Ve'omer, this is from Jeremiah. Mikveh Yisrael Adonai. Okay, mikveh, and we know a word that sounds something like that, which is tikva, right? They have the same root. Mikveh and tikva, the kuf vav he. And in the book of Jeremiah, this is really about the word tikva, hope. This is saying, hope of Israel, God. You are the hope of Israel, God. And our commentators say, actually, this mikveh and this zarakti alechem mayim, this word is actually not about hope. This word is about purifying ourselves. This word is actually about making sure that we're able to become pure through water. And that's exactly what our text comes away with here, right? Ma mikveh mitaher et hatmeim. So our text says, just as the mikveh purifies the unclean, or in this case, we would really say those who have contracted ritual impurity. Af hakadosh baruch hu mitaher et Yisrael. God, through this mikvah, somehow this like heavenly mikvah, also makes Israel ritually pure. Okay. Then later on Mishnah Torah, right? We have Maimonides again. He brings a little bit more oomph to this, so that the person does not have the average person does not have to go into Mishnah Yoma and try to understand what the heck the rabbis were trying to tell them in this piece. Instead, he puts it very clearly. According to biblical law, any water that is gathered may be used for immersion, right? May be used for mikvah, as it is written, a gathering of water, right? And now we have another piece of Torah, mikveh mayim. Okay, so this is the gathering of water. This isn't talking about the hope of water, as Jeremiah so poetically put it. Mikol makom, in any kind or of any kind in any place, provided that there is enough of it to fill the measure required for the complete immersion of a person's entire body. Okay, and this is about 40 seahs. And this is where we find the exact measurement. How much water do we actually need for a mikveh to be kosher? And Maimonides, once again, he's super, super clear. And then I just brought you the verse from Vayikra, from Leviticus, when a person, and this is the first verse in the Torah that is about human purification as opposed to elemental purification or material pureness, right? Material wholeness of oil or gold. So here we have when the one with a discharge becomes purified. This is talking about a seminal discharge. Of his discharge, he shall count off 7 days for his purification, wash those clothes, and bathe his body in fresh water. And we see here mayim, right? We see here right here mayim. Then he shall be pure. So via the water, via this immersion, via this mikveh mayim, he's pure. Okay, so initially, it's believed that this kind of purification of a deceased person was happening right after the destruction of the first temple, right? We can kind of picture it. We can kind of understand why the Israelites were going through this immensely unfathomable situation. They had ruled in the land of Israel for around 75 years or so. And in that moment, their entire lives are destroyed. This is a moment of unbelievable destruction of government, of change, of scarcity, of interaction with death. And in this moment, something is needed to deal with this interaction with death. Something tangible is needed. And so the Israelites begin to bathe the bodies in a way of saying this person has now reached some kind of ritual purity, even though their death came as a result of destruction. This person is ritually pure. Eventually, more and more things are added to this ritual purity, and you'll see that I wrote up here mikvah/tahara. And the reason for that is that the word tahara becomes a little confusing at this point. At a basic level, tahara is ritual purity or elementally whole or a soul free of vulnerabilities. But now tahara comes to stand for both the entire process of ritual washing of the meit, meitah, meiteh, and the specific ritual washing within the tahara process. That will become a little bit more clear in a few minutes. This process was codified by Rabbi Aharon Berechia, who lived in Modena, Italy, and he codified it kind of close to his death, actually. He codified it in 1426, and the book that he wrote was called Ma'avar Yabok. Ma'avar Yabok has all kinds of different rituals for before a person dies, for as a person is dying, for after death. And this is the first time that we see an actual understanding of what this ritual of tahara after death looks like. And we're going to go through a few of the texts that people say during this ritual cleansing, during this larger experience of tahara, as opposed to, as you'll see, part 2 is the specific ritual washing. And perhaps we'll learn a little bit more at a later date of what all of the texts are, the entire liturgy that you might hold. But I'll also say that this piece, there's only one piece of it is specifically halachic, specifically according to Jewish law. The rest of it is actually mostly customs. So of course, one generation's custom is the next generation's Jewish law, and so on and so forth. So there is a sense that because this was codified in 1426, where we still do it in that exact same way, but tahara happens behind closed doors. Just like every Seder is different, yet it hits on the most important points. Every tahara is different. It hits on the most important points. It gets the halachic piece, but there are customs in many, many, many different cultures. And as a result, depending on where you go, the tahara is vastly different. I have performed tahara in 3 countries now, and in 7 different Chevra Kadisha, right, burial societies. And every single time, it's vastly different. Everyone has their own custom, but the basic building blocks remain the same. Okay, so the first piece is rechitza, which literally means like washing. This refers to the hygienic washing. The second piece is the tahara. We know that word, right? Elementally pure, free of soul vulnerabilities. Ritually pure. This refers to the ritual washing. Then we have halbasha, the dressing, and then we have hashkava, the actually lying down of the deceased. Before anybody does tahara, and this actually remains the same. They say this piece called the Mechila. Mechila, right? We might know that word from Yom Kippur. It literally means forgiveness or pardoning. And this piece is said in the language of the people who are performing the tahara. So if your native language is Hebrew, you say it in Hebrew. If your native language is English, you say it in English. If your native language is Portuguese, you say it in Portuguese. The point of the Mechila being in your native language is so that every word you understand specifically. When you say this statement of Mechila, this statement of forgiveness, you know exactly what you're saying. Okay, so you insert the Hebrew name of the deceased, and then you'll read. Actually, could I get a reader? Alan, would you read for me?
Sure. The Hebrew name of the deceased. We ask your forgiveness for any distress we may cause you during this tahara. We will do everything possible to ensure that you are treated with respect and that all the elements of the tahara are properly completed. Everything we are about to do is for the sake of your kavod.
Beautiful. So we come back to this kavod hamet. We come back to this reverence or respect for the deceased. So then we do the rechitza. We do the hygienic washing. And what are we actually honoring in the hygienic washing? Why do you think we even do that, right? Nobody sees the person, even their loved one. You know, maybe they'll see them one last time, but usually it's traditional for the person for the person after this experience to no longer be seen. You're never going to see their face. So why do you think we even do this? Any guesses?
Purification.
Okay, purification, but this is the hygienic washing, right? This isn't the ritual washing. Yeah, Sandy.
I still think there's an element of respect for the deceased.
Yeah, beautiful. So there's an element of respect for the deceased. This piece has a different reading depending on gender. Many pieces, you know, of course, Hebrew is a gendered language. All of the suffixes of verbs are specific for gender, but these are actually completely different texts based on your gender. So this first one is a text that you'll say as you're doing the hygienic cleansing, as you're doing the hygienic washing for a woman. Could we have someone read that? Yeah, Sandy, go ahead.
Are you fair, my darling? I'm sorry. You are fair, my darling. You are fair. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of ghosts streaming down Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes climbing up from the washing pool. All of them bear twins, and no one loses her young. Your lips are like a crimson thread. Your mouth is lovely. Your brow behind your veil like a pomegranate split open. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built to hold weapons, hung with 1,000 shields, all the quivers of warriors. Your breasts are like 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle, browing among the lilies. When the day blows gently and the shadows flee, take me to the Mount of Myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. Every part of you is fair, my darling. There is no blemish in you. Wow.
Okay, so wow, exactly. This text is so evocative. It's so beautiful. And it comes from Song of Songs. It comes from this love poetry, depending on your perspective between a person and another person, or Israel and God. And this moment is really about honoring the body. It's about saying this vessel has carried a soul for such a long time, the entire lifetime, even if their life was cut short. And in this moment, we lift up how beautiful this vessel has been. Yeah, Judy. You're muted, Judy. You're on mute, Judy.
The imagery is strange. There's such strength and power. Your neck is like a Tower of David built to hold weapons. It's an unusual kind of an imagery. It's like, it's not as beautiful and soft. Maybe for a male, if they want to be emphasizing power, it's giving power to the woman, actually, but it's unusual.
Yeah, it's a little unusual, but there's a sense of strength in the
Strength,
body.
yes, right.
And especially we honor this this sense of strength in a woman's, and this is solely said to a person who is a woman, or a meta who is a woman. We're saying there's such strength in you, even as this person is deceased. This person lies before you, and perhaps at this moment there's no strength left in them. And yet we comment on how this vessel has served this soul for the years of their life. For a man, we read this piece, also from Song of Songs, also from this love poetry, also very evocative. Could we have another reader? George, would you read this piece for me?
Sure.
Thanks.
Song of Songs, 5:11 through 16. 11. His head is fine as gold. His locks are curled and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by water courses, bathed in milk, set by a brimming pool. His cheeks are like beds of spices, banks of perfume. His lips are like lilies. They drip flowing myrrh. His hands are rods of gold, studded with beryl. His belly, a tablet of ivory, adorned with sapphires. His legs are like marble pillars, set in sockets of fine gold. He is majestic as Lebanon, stately as the cedars. His mouth is delicious, and all of him is delightful. Such is my beloved, such is my darling, O maidens of Jerusalem.
Okay, so this is what is said in front of a man's body, in front of a deceased man. There's immense power, there's immense love in these words, right? They drip flowing myrrh. It's a delighting of the senses, this vessel that has carried this soul. Yes, Judy.
I don't want to belabor the point. This is much more feminine. It could have been a reversal. The imagery is beautiful throughout, and the other it's just a more powerful male to say, especially at these times, imagery. This is very beautiful and softer.
Perhaps it's softer. And yet, you did comment on your neck is like the Tower of David built to hold weapons.
Yeah.
But I think that it's undeniable that your breasts are like two fawns, twins of the gazelle, browsing among the lilies, right? That's the same kind of evocative, beautiful language, right? It's undeniable that that's feminine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sandra, go ahead. Sandy.
I think it's beautiful that this is, I mean, I would think Wouldn't be that wonderful if you go, when you die, somebody goes to your corpse and speaks like that in cleansing the body, because instead of looking at it upon as a thing, as a corpse, as disgusting, by saying it, you are recognizing, I'll say the word, the holiness, the whole spirit, the whole worth of the person. And also, again, that should give comfort to the bereaved.
Right, right. So these are texts in which we're saying this thing in front of us, this mate, meta, metet, this is a cherished person. This is a beautiful vessel. This is something that should be cared for and is deserving of love and respect and honor. So then as we keep going, we move into the actual tahara. And I forgot to mention, but this picture is taken from a series of paintings depicting tahara that was done by a Chevra Kadisha, or someone close to the Chevra Kadisha. Perhaps they were even in the Chevra Kadisha in Prague in 1772. And then we come to this picture, which is taken just a few years ago from a place in Long Island. You'll see here that there is an actual mikveh that the deceased is put into. So in this moment, this is the tahara, right? This is the ritual washing. And in this moment, perhaps there is a structure, a specific place, a specific mikveh that's not used by living human beings, but by the deceased, and in which there is this actual moment of ritual purity. They go into the mikveh and they come out of the mikveh. But in lieu of a space that has a Chevra Kadisha mikveh or a funereal mikveh, people use these, in this case, they're tins, in other cases, and they're emblazoned with the name, right? You can see Chevra Kadisha, and then you see Papa here. Anybody know where Papa is? Or what these may be from?
Hungary.
Beautiful. Okay, exactly. So these tins, these water basins, are used to simulate a mikveh experience. Instead of actually having someone go into a mikveh, you would fill up these basins of water, and in a specific way. Some Chevra Kadisha have a specific way of going from the top right and then around the meit meta meta and then up the left side and then down the middle. That's what we do in our Chevra Kadisha, but there are all kinds of different ways to do that, and different mystical derivatives, which is really, really exciting and fun to learn about. But no matter which way, there's a certain amount of water that you use, like we read in the Mishnah Torah from Maimonides, and then you're able to, in this way, simulate a mikveh experience. Okay, and while you are simulating the mikveh experience, you're saying tahor-hu, this person is pure, tahora-hi for a woman, tahora-he for a person whose gender is ambiguous. And before you're doing that, when we fill up these water basins, or in some cases just buckets that are not emblazoned with the name, these, by the way, are exactly used by the Chevra Kadisha of Papa, Hungary, and they are now retired, but they were used in the 1880s. So while we're filling up these buckets, while we're filling up the water basins, we read, Rabbi Akiva said, "How fortunate are you, Israel, before whom you are purified, and who purifies you," right? The exact same piece from Mishnah Yoma that we read for the mikvah. This is the originating piece for the mikvah. And then we have another piece of Song of Songs. You are a garden spring, a well of fresh water, a rill of Lebanon. And it's interesting here because in the Song of Songs, this is God speaking to Israel. And in this moment, we are, when we say this, simulating that relationship. This is our beloved. This is someone who we care for immensely. Oh. This is a person who is cherished in our community, and not only a person who is cherished in our community, but if we think about it from the lens of Song of Songs, this is our chosen person. So the relationship is so close. It's brought so close together. And then we say this line from Ezekiel, I will sprinkle pure water upon you and you shall be purified, right? That's actually this line also in Mishnah Yoma, it's repeated. But then we also include this next piece. I will purify you from all your defilement and from all your fetishes. It's not a great translation. When we say from all of your defilement, we're just talking about, it says, Mikol tumotechem. So tumotechem, right? We heard that word before, tum'ah. That's the word for ritual impurity. It's the word for vulnerability. It's not really defilement. It's more that we're making you ritually pure. You came into this world ritually pure as a pure soul. You interacted with all kinds of things in this world that made you vulnerable. Whether it was sorry, there's some echoing. Just gonna try to turn that off. Whether it was this moment of relationship, right? Or it was a moment of losing someone, or it was a moment of losing in general, right? All of these different things can make one vulnerable. Now we are making you whole once again. And then, umikol gilulechem, this is a word that is actually used in the second piece of the Aleinu that we don't say in our community. But gilulim or gilulechem are like not really fetishes, but kind of like pestilence or sometimes it's interpreted as idol worship or idolatry, right? This is about making sure that this person is completely pure, and also it really brings up for us that even in this moment of ritual purity, one of the things that is so opposite of monotheism and opposite of our tradition is idolatry. So even in this very last moment, even in this final ritual, we ensure that a person who committed any kind of idolatry, and maybe we think about idolatry in the antiquated understanding of when Abraham in the Midrash took his stick and destroyed all of the idols in his father's shop, and then told his father that the largest of the idols actually destroyed the rest of them. And of course, his father said, "Oh, well, he can't do that." And tells Abraham that he's completely out of his mind, which of course proves Abraham's point. But this is a moment in which we're saying that no matter what idol we're thinking of, we have very different idols today. We're glued to our phones, we're glued to the news, we're worshiping different sports players and things like that. The idols are very different today, and yet we're purifying ourselves of any pull from anything else that isn't God. anything that is separate from God. Then, as we pour the water, we say, I included just for the woman here, but you say tahorhu for a man, tahorahi for a woman, tahoraheh for a person whose gender is ambiguous. And then finally, we get to the halbasha and then the laying to rest. I think that the halbasha is a longer conversation, so I think that we'll end here and we'll pick up there. But at the end of the day, what we're doing, what we're experiencing, what we're moving through in a tahara is we're attempting to get a person back to that experience of wholeness, to that almost as if they experienced all of these things in life that made them vulnerable, and now once again they can be complete, they can be whole. So that's what I have for now. We actually have a few more minutes, so if there are any questions or comments on what we've learned today, I'd love to continue the conversation. And if not, we can sign off 3 minutes early. Yeah, Sandy, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry I missed all the other ones, but I think this was wonderful that you chose to teach us this, and it really is very comforting, and think about how death is treated in these works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about this interaction with God, and if the soul is going back to God, and we'll talk about that in our last session. Oh, by the way, it's good that we're talking about this now. We're going to add one more session to this on March 13th. So next week we'll continue with Tahara, and we'll talk about also burial. And then the following week we're going to do the afterlife and Olam Haba, the world to come. So that should be a very interesting class. But I mention that only as a tangent because you're bringing up this idea of how nice it is to be, and how comforting it is for a person to know that when they die, they're going to be embraced by their community. Quite literally, their body will be embraced and praised by their community. And there's a lot of conversation about God and the soul and spirituality here, but at the end of the day, Tahara is about being that last loving touch to a person before they're buried. And that's very powerful. Trish.
I just wondered if there was a text. We saw the text from Song of Songs for the man and the woman. Is there a text for the third category of the?
Yes.
Yes,
we didn't read it because I wanted to get to the end of Tahara. Yeah. But yes, so we have for a person whose gender is ambiguous. It's not taken from Song of Songs, which is really interesting. I think that's mostly because even though, Judy, I know you said that it seemed like the text for the man had feminine characteristics and the text for the woman had masculine characteristics, and that's true. I mean, I think that all of us kind of contain a little bit of the feminine, a little bit of the masculine, even though we exist in the genders that we do. But
it would be very different. It's just I'm thinking of how the genders were looked at in those years.
Yeah, absolutely. But the texts for the person who's gender ambiguous are very interesting. You have this very beginning text of the creation of humankind from the Tanakh, right? This is the famous line in Genesis, and God created humankind in the divine image, B'Tselem Elohim, literally what we're talking about, creating it in the image of God, creating them male and female, right? So at this moment, the body is an amorphous blob with allegedly multiple kinds of genitalia. And that's why this text is used. And it's also a text that lifts up, right? And says that this is what the divine image is, perhaps. And then we have this second text, and they're said together. There's no real break. And the Lord deals death and gives life, casts down into Sheol, which is kind of Jewish understanding of purgatory. We're going to talk about that in the afterlife class. And raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. God casts down. God also lifts high. God raises the poor from the dust, lifts up the needy from the dunghill, setting them with nobles, granting them seats of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's. God has set the world upon them. And that, I think, actually is evocative of both of the pieces of Song of Songs, not in the way that it's kind of sexual and poetic, not in the way of the sensuality, but in the way of the power that is brought to each of those people, in the way in kind of what you were speaking about earlier, Judy, right? This is emblematic of. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built to hold weapons, hung with a thousand shields, all the quivers of warriors. Right, that kind of has the same feel. Yes, we'll go for 3 more minutes, and then we'll come to an end. Alan, go ahead.
I'm sorry to break this train because it's beautiful, but you said that you are adding a class on March 13th at 10:15.
Yes.
There's a Haggadah class at the same time.
The Haggadah class is going to start the next week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Karen.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I also missed the other classes, but this has been great, and I really find this whole ritual just incredibly comforting in terms of the dignity it gives, the sanctity, the respect for the deceased, and all of that. I happened to have 2 days ago observed my mother's first yurt site. Wow. So this is very meaningful for me. And I also have a question, which is that does any other religion have something similar to these rituals?
Yeah, so all religions have death rituals. A few of them are like there's a Viking ritual that has water and fire. There's a Chinese ritual that or I guess it's probably Buddhist, but it's not really done outside of China, of cremation and water before cremation. Water is really a part of a lot of death rituals. They're not, however, they don't have a liturgy most of the time. It's more impromptu and extemporaneous. This in comparison, has been compiled and added on to for now 2,000 years or so. But I'm sure that there are also others that maybe do have a little bit more of a liturgy that I just don't know about yet. Okay, Sandy, last comment, and then we'll finish.
This may be a question for another time, but I'm very interested in knowing about the idea of gender ambiguity and how, right. And so I don't think I have to give you, that is self-explanatory.
Yes, it's self-explanatory. It's so interesting. The way that we perceive gender today and how it's played such a role in our politics of the day. When if you look in the Talmud, there's a maybe half a page long passage about the 6 different genders. Mm-hmm. And maybe at another time we'll do a gender ambiguity or Jewish gender Judaism kind of class, and how it's played out. All right, everyone. It's been so wonderful learning with you. I'm looking forward to next week. We'll continue the process of tahara and understanding the halbasha, the dressing, and then the hashkava, the laying down in burial, and then we'll move into some of the shiva pieces, and then in our final session together, we'll learn about the afterlife and all of those different kinds of things that Judaism has to offer.